That's like. All right. Back. Yeah. All right. Good morning to you all. Welcome to our next class on research methods. Are we online? We are online. So last week we began with just looking back at the basic foundations of management research. Then we went into philosophical issues. And we said that for any research, we must understand that there are some philosophical assumptions that researchers bring when they embark on research. We said we can have ontology, which describes the nature of reality. And then epistemology, which looks at what constitutes valid knowledge. Then we talked about axiology, which deals with the role of values in research. Then beyond that, we went into the paradigms or worldviews when it comes to research. We indicated that there could be several ways to classify research paradigms, but for our purposes, we start to looking at constructivism, positivism, realism, and then we also look at what? Pragmatism. Now, so these are research paradigms or worldviews or philosophical positions that can be taken by researchers. But the last part we want to look at in terms of the first round of lectures, which is our first topic, is just to conclude on research approaches. Now, research approaches are generally classified into two. Number one being the deductive approach. Number two being the inductive approach. And when you put the two together, you get what we call what? The approach of what? Abduction, or the abductive approach. Now, when we say that research is conducted through deductism, or using the deductive approach, we mean that the researcher begins with a theory. And then based on this theory, data is collected in order to what? To test the theory. In other words, there is a theoretical proposition around the issue that you want to discuss. Now, having reviewed the theory, you now embark on data collection, and having assembled the data, you put the data through analysis. And upon the analysis, you make what? Deductions. And that is what we call the deductive approach. This is contrasted with the inductive approach, where the researcher begins with data collection. So after collecting the data, you now subject the data to analysis. After the analysis, a theory may come out of it. So with the deductive approach, which we discussed first, the researcher starts with what? Theory. In other words, there's an existing theory, and you have reviewed literature on this theory. You have carved your problem statement around this theory, and then you collect data, and after the analysis, you make your what? Your deductions. Okay? Whereas in the inductive approach, you start with what? Data collection. Or you may not have any underlying theory. It is probably a novel area where there is no existing theory to the best of your searches. So you start with the data collection, look at the data collection, do your analysis. After performing the analysis, you arrive at a theory or a set of theories. Now, so when you have done either abduction or deduction, we've indicated that your purpose in the case of the deductive approach is basically to test theory, whereas in the case of inductive research, you are trying to what? Now build a theory or a set of theory. Now, if you are doing abduction, what you simply do is to collect data. And when you collect the data, you examine the patterns that emerge from the data. Having looked at the patterns, you then see whether the patterns give you what? Insight into what? A new theory. Or the patterns are confirming what? An existing theory. After that, you now go back and collect data to test the theory. So in the case of abduction, at least you have two stages of what? Data collection. The first is what you have collected through what? The inductive approach, where you have collected data, and that data is showing you that there is some theory that is emerging. Now, when you see that that theory is emerging, it is not time to make what? Definitive conclusions. You now go back to the field and what? Collect data to come and test the theory with the data. And then in that approach, we call that abduction. Now, having looked at the approaches, our next task is to look at the research process. You recall that last week we gave an indication of what the research process looks like. So our next topic is overview of the research process, an overview of the research process. Now, at the end of the lessons, these are the issues that you should know from this particular topic. Number one, are we having challenges with that? We have moved to the new, yeah, so we'll finish with this one. So number one, at the end of this lecture, you should be able to describe the phases of the business research process. There are three main phases in the research process. You should be able to describe each stage. Number two, by the end of the lecture, you should be able to understand what we mean by theory. So go back. you should be able to understand what we mean when we use the term theory. And then you indicate how theory can be applied in business research. Then the third objective that we would want to learn from this process is for you to be able to explain how the scientific method improves the research process. Remember that in our first lecture, we talked about the fact that if any research is to be believed or taken serious, then it must follow the scientific method. So what is the scientific method? How does it look like? You should be able to learn that from this lecture. Then the fourth objective is that you should be able to contrast the rigor of science with the pragmatics of business. Scientific methods, one of the characteristics of scientific research method or scientific method is that scientific method must be rigorous. Now, in practice, business may not be all about rigor because you are balancing several interests in order to arrive at what? A good decision. So we see how to contrast the scientific requirement of rigor with the pragmatic nature of business. Then the last one, we should be able to understand the role and importance of research proposal. So we will look at what constitutes a research proposal. If I ask you to write a research proposal, how should you start? What format should you use in order to write a research proposal? So look at all that, time permitting today. So we start with the research process. And in the phases of the research process. Now, the research process can be categorized into three main phases: being, formulation, execution, and what? Analysis. So you have the formulation stage, the execution stage, and then the analytical stage. So three main phases: formulation, execution, and then what? Analysis. So let's start with the formulation stage. The formulation stage is the stage where you now begin to what? Craft the research idea. So the search, the quest to look for the research topic, the need for the study, the purpose of the study, the research problem, including the fact that you have to review the literature and examine the theory, develop your research questions, develop your research objectives, and design the research, in which case you are trying to define the methodological parameters of the research. So that phase where you look at the purpose of the research, you define the problem, you review literature, you examine the theory, and you design the research method, is what we call the formulation stage, or some will say initiation stage, formulation stage, or formulation phase. Now, when you have formulated the research, remember that the formulation, as we are talking about here, is that you would have done everything, including up to where you do the research design. When you are doing research design, it means that you have reached what? Methodology. You have reached what? Methodology. Now, so when you have your methodology ready, then it means that you can now go to the field where necessary in order to what? To collect the data. So data collection is part of what? The execution stage. Deciding on, doing your sampling, designing your protocols, where whether you are using a key informant interview, you are using an interview guide, all that come under the execution stage. So you can look at the execution stage as involving the field work, where you are doing the field work, and where you are doing the coding of the data, and where you are entering the data into a software, if you are going to use a software to do the analysis. So that becomes the execution stage. Now, after you have collected the data, you have cleaned the data, because sometimes when you administer the questionnaire, you see that some respondents didn't complete some of the questions. So there will be gaps. So you have to take a decision as to whether to go back, if you can identify them, to fill those missing portions, or to declare those questionnaires unusable. If there are not so many, you may declare them as unusable. But if there are quite many, given your sample, then you may have to go back to the field, or you discard those questionnaires and re-interview some new persons so that you can have data that is good enough for analysis. So that moves us to phase 3, where we do the analytics. Now here, first, your role is to analyze the data. And later on, we'll talk about analyzing data. What are the various data analysis techniques? Because it will depend on, one, your research philosophy, which will drive your methodology, so that if it is quantitative in nature, then you are looking for a statistical software that can analyze what? Quantitative data. If it is qualitative data, you are also looking at a qualitative data analysis software like InVivo or Atlas TI to use for the analysis. But having done the analysis, the research doesn't end there. You must interpret the results. And that's where most people are found wanting. Most researchers are found wanting. For some people, the analysis is not a problem. But after having done the analysis, you now have to give meaning. What meaning is coming out of the data? What are the results implying? Now, when you know the implications, and based on the statistical tools that are available to you, you can make inferences. So since 20% of the respondents said so and so and so, it implies that so and so and so would be the case. This means that you are making inference. Now, but before you can really make inference, strictly speaking, you have to do some statistical test. That is, if you are a positivist, okay, you need to do inferential statistical test. Because in research, just putting percentages together, so I've projected that, say, the average of the age of the class is say 34 years. Okay? So this is my hypothesis. Okay? So I'm saying that the average. But when I now test this by collecting data from you, I realize that no, the average is somewhere around 32 years. Now, here is the case. The question is, even though 32 is different from 34 when we are doing the counting, but statistically, is 32 statistically significant from 34? Is it or is it not? So, when I ask you, in case you are the one who is doing a presentation like this, and I ask you this question, you are in trouble. Why? Because you can't just tell me that it's not significant. And you can't also just tell me that it is significant. You have to apply a test. So there are several tests you can use, whereby the test will take the difference between 34 and 32, and then generate p-values, a p-value, for me to take a decision whether 32 is the same as 34 in practice. So I can only arrive at an inference which will make meaning after I have subjected this to a test. And that realm of analysis is what we call inferential statistics. Inferential statistics, where I'm making inferences. Which is distinct from descriptive statistics. In descriptive statistics, I'll just simply say that 34 is a bit higher than what? 32. So I leave it there. But the problem is that some will just stay at the descriptive level and then submit that for examination. You just leave it here. So 34 is great. And then even go ahead to deduce implications. If it comes to me, I'll have a problem with that. And we always refer them back to come here. Because this is the most basic level, where you are just dealing with what? Percentages, frequencies, mean, standard deviation, median, mode. But you have to be able to subject that to inferential statistics before you can make very concrete deductions from the analysis. Now, that said, you can look at it also that the section on data analysis requires that you decide whether your propositions or hypotheses are supported or not. Because usually the hypotheses are based on what? Say theory. Or it can just be based on a hunch, or what we just say call an educated guess. Okay? An educated guess. Now, when you have done the analysis, you must be able to state categorically whether your analysis is supporting your theory or it is not supporting the theory. So you have to be clear about that. Then you have to also be clear about the limitations of your state. No, it will be difficult to get a very perfect research done. So what you need to do is that you acknowledge that you thought that you should have done A, B, C, D. But because of limitations A, B, C, D, you couldn't do that. But you don't leave it there. You have to come back and indicate that the limitations notwithstanding, your research still offers some meaningful results which can be relied upon for decision making. Otherwise, if you just state the limitations without coming back to tell us that at least the limitations notwithstanding, there is still some value in your research, then you'll be shooting yourself in the foot. Or you yourself, you have condemned your work and said that it is limited in these parameters. And for that matter, I just base my decision on your limitation and say that then the research is useless. So it is always good to indicate the limitations. Now, in acknowledging limitations, it shows that you understand the research process and you understand the length and breadth of the subject matter you are dealing with. So usually reviewers would be more inclined to sympathize with you when you acknowledge the limitations. Okay? But where you pretend that there are no limitations and you just write everything as if it is smooth and perfect, and then the reviewers now identify the limitations, they would want to use that to crucify you because they think that it's like you don't know, but you are pretending to know. So it is always good for you to acknowledge the limitations of your work. So after doing the analysis, you now prepare the report. The report writing has to follow a particular format. So it's not just any report. It depends on what the research context is. If it is a paper that you are writing for publication, each journal has its format. So you have to go and then download the format and then you write according to that format. If it is a dissertation you are writing, the university will provide a format for the dissertation. So your report will be formatted in line with that. If it is a funded project, the funders will also often give you an outline of the report. So you have to write it in line with that. So otherwise, if you write in the journal format, but you present it to an organization, it will not be useful to them. So the report writing has to follow the format of the requesting organization or the purpose for which the research is done. After going through the three phases, we now come to the process of what? Decision making. Okay? So what can we learn from the research? Does the research have implications for firms, for governments, for the central bank? for various institutions, for orphans? Does it have implications for the educational system, among others? So that is the decision-making phase. You can also take decision whether the research calls for more research. Okay? Because after going through any research, you should be able to identify gaps for future research. It's one of the hallmarks of the good research. You should be able, so sometimes it comes under because once you identify the limitations of your work, from there, you can project some of them as what? Gaps that researchers can take up and then fill. So if you yourself can fill the gap, then that decision is taken here, where you now start over again. And then the cycle will continue. And as we are indicating here, is some kind of a process. Okay. Any question or contribution? Now, this slide is just illustrating examples of research problems that we can examine within the area of business, and I'll look at one or two of them. So, for instance, a researcher may have a research problem where he or she may want to look at how price and quality rate on customers, how do price and quality rate on customers' evaluation of products. In other words, price and quality of a particular product. How do they influence the evaluation of a customer regarding a particular product? So that's what this research problem. So this is a researchable research problem. Now, you see that this is broad in essence. So you will now have to operationalize it as a researcher. So basically this, you can get your research topic from this, and you look at the effect of price and quality rating on customers' evaluation of products. So that's a research topic, where you can turn into what? A research problem or a research question. So you can now break this problem into a series of what? Research what? Objectives. Okay? Or a series of research questions. So that one research question can focus on just the price. Another will look at the quality. Okay? But before that, you can also have another research question that will just be looking at the profile of what? The customers. You just want to look at the characteristics or the profile of the customers that are doing the evaluation of what? The products. Beyond that, somebody can also add another research question that could look at challenges that customers face in evaluating products using what? The price and quality rate. But the quality, at the end of the day, when you put all these objectives together, they must be able to fulfill or answer the research question. Okay? So, yes, please. Yes. So you can, somebody can also decide to look at it from geographical differences. Another person can use gender, can say that female customers' ratings are different from what male customers were the ratings. So you can also look at it that way. Yes, you can do that. So you see that it will depend on your what perspective. Number two, the literature, and also the data, whether you can have the issue you want to look at, can you easily have the data to test that? Okay. So research objectives can be quite flexible, but at the end of the day, they must speak to what? The problem. They must answer the problem. Okay. So somebody can also look at how is the effect of participative budgeting on performance moderated by control systems. So this looks a bit more complex. Why? Because first, you have a relationship between what? Participative budgeting and performance. So that's the first relationship you have to look at. So first, you have to assess whether participative budgeting affects the performance of a firm or firms. Now, having looked at that, then you now have to see whether control systems influence the effect of participative budgeting on what? Performance. Okay. So at least these two objectives must be accomplished if you want to undertake research based on that particular topic. And several other research objectives can come out of this. But at the minimum, these two I have mentioned, if your research objectives don't cover them, then you will be hitting off tangent. Okay? Now, somebody can also look at how the new packaging affected the sales of the product. You have designed or come out with some new packaging for your product. And you want to measure its impact on what? Sales. Whether packaging, so this is looking at whether packaging affects sales or it just increases your cost. Okay? So you have to look at the issue of the packaging. You look at the new packaging, describe it, first of all. What is the nature of it? Then you now look at the effect on sales. You can also look at customers' perception of the new packaging and whether it influences their what? Purchasing behavior. So all that will come here, and so on and so forth. Okay. So by and large, yes, please. So look at it this way. Depending on the context, what I stated over here are broad, what we call broad research questions or research problem. Okay. You now break the research questions, the broad research question, into specific what? Research questions. And these specific research questions must have corresponding what? Research objectives. If you are doing a dissertation or thesis. But if I am writing a research paper, I need not state research objectives and questions at the same time because they are the same in terms of the essence. Okay? But for most theses, they will require that research questions must reflect in what? Research objectives. So they usually will want, if you have 5 research questions, you must have what? 5 research objectives. Okay. But if I am just writing a research paper for a journal, the style is the same. I can't list objectives and then questions and ask questions to match them. No. You are repeating yourself. So that is the situation. Okay. Yes, please. Yes. The objectives are basically stating your mission. What you want to, what you want to do. So the objectives are translating the questions into positive sense, where it's giving you tasks to accomplish, basically. Okay. It answers the research question will just here mean that they match with them. They correspond with the research question. Okay. Because to answer the research question, you must go through what? The research process, the 3 phases. Okay, so what we are just talking about is phase 1. Okay. Now, suppose that you have a research problem, which is that, to what extent do marketing strategies need to be changed to improve customer satisfaction? To what extent do marketing strategies need to be changed to improve customer satisfaction? So this is a broad research question, which you can turn into a research topic. Now, I must state, and we'll come to that later. Sometimes some research topics are questions. So somebody can state this as the research topic, which is a question form. It's allowed. Okay. So you want to just prick the minds of the readers by stating that to what extent do marketing strategies need to be changed? So, but if you don't want the topic to be a question, you can just transform it into just say the impact of change in marketing strategy on improve customer. Yes, you can change it that way. But the use of the word impact is what is the problem. Because when you now use impact, you are now committing yourself to a deeper level of analysis. Impact is deeper than effect. If I just say, I want to look at the effect, okay? If I just want to look at the effect, I don't need to look at the causal level. Okay? So this is what I'm talking about. Suppose that I just want to look at the effect of X on what? Y. All I need to do is just to get my data on what? Observations on X and observations on what? on y. So as a statistician, I will simply do a regression analysis. And probably I come out with this equation. Okay, don't take this too seriously. Don't take it too seriously, but just to give an illustrative example. Okay. Now, as a statistician, I can test this just and produce a relationship like this when I put the data into my software and do my regression analysis. Because I said how X is affecting what Y. So I'm looking at the effect of X on what? Y. So we call that Y, X the what? The what? Generally, we call X what? The independent what? Variable. Or the explanatory variable. And Y what? The dependent variable. So if I just do this analysis and I get this coefficient, it simply tells me that when X, because I was looking at effect, when X changes, so we use delta to represent, changes by 1 unit, 1 unit. Because if it is money, it will be 1 C. So that's why I say 1 unit. Then Y will change by 0.6 units. That's how we interpret something like this. When X changes by 1 unit, then Y must change what? By 0.6 units. So suppose that X is sales and Y is profit. So it means that when sales should increase by 1 CD, then profit will increase by what? 60 pesos. So that's a simple illustration. So what I have done is look at the effect. But when I present that before my peers, they will ask me, okay, don't you think that it is rather Y that is causing X to change and not X that is causing Y to change? How do you know that it is X that is causing Y to change and not Y? In other words, why are you attributing the increase in profit to sales, knowing that last year's profit was plowed back? So is it because we plowed back profit last year? That's why we are now experiencing increasing what? Sales, which is now also making it look like profit is what? Increase. So I have a problem here. So is it Y that is causing X to change, or it is X that causes Y to change? So this one, then I have to do further analysis. To control, I have to control for X. And look at whether if I do another analysis, Y will also affect X. So if I reverse them, one way is to reverse them. I bring X here, and I bring Y here and do the analysis, and see whether Y is also affecting X. in that case, we say that there's a what? A bi-causal what? Relationship. But even that is not enough, because somebody will just say that what you have just done is that you have just collected data for 1 year. So the results you are giving us is only unique to that year. So what do I do? So I have to go back and collect data for several years. And then I do the analysis, acknowledging that Y can cause X to change, and X can also cause Y to change. Then I can be doing impact analysis. You understand what I'm saying? So sometimes the words you use in research, they have implications for the choice of method, just by the words that you. So I was saying, suppose the research problem is given by this. Now, when you do further review of the research that is published, the following research questions can come out of your discussion, which are all directed at fulfilling this particular broad research of. Questions where students are presented their work and you ask them. You ask them that basic question: what is your unit of analysis? And they can tell you. The unit of analysis is different from the unit of observation. The unit of observation is simply the elements from which you are collecting the data. Okay, so those basically your respondents. But you can have a situation where the unit of analysis and then what? The research element which is the basic frame that you are doing the analysis, would then be the same. That's the unit of observation. So the unit of observation and then the unit of analysis can sometimes be the same. Because if my research is targeted at household heads, household heads can be my unit of observation. It can also be what? My unit of what? Analysis. Because I'm doing the analysis at the household level. Now, but I can also collect data from household heads and I aggregate them at the community level. So the data is collected at what? The level of household heads, but I have aggregated the data at what? Community level. In this case, the unit of analysis is different from what? The unit of observation. Okay? So the unit of observation will be household heads here, but the unit of analysis is what? Community or community level. So for every research you undertake, you should be able to clearly state your unit of analysis and then your unit of operation. Then we have key informants. Key informants are usually individuals or persons that have some valuable knowledge to share on the study or research. So they are chosen because they have some key information. So if I want to know more about a particular community, one of the key informants of that community will be who? The what? The chief. Why the chief? So the chiefs are what? The custodians of the community. So apart from the chief, who else can you contact? The assemblyman. So the key people who by their unique position have some what? Power and some valuable information. Sometimes just interviewing one key informant may be more useful to you than interviewing the whole community. That's why key informants are important. Once you have a key informant, sometimes it can just make your work easy because everything that you need to know, they have that information. So if I come to an organization and I can have the opportunity to interview the CEO, I will not spend time to interview those that are lower than the CEO because all of them will be reporting to him. Okay? So that's the essence of a key informant. So if you are interviewing a key informant, the research tool you need is what we call key informant interview guide. You must have what we call an interview guide, which you use to interview the key informant. It's not moving. Check. All right. So now let's look at theory. Theory and science. Theory and science. So the question is, what is theory? Now, when we talk about theory in science, we are looking at a situation where some facts have emerged out of several experiments. Okay? So it has come about as a result of several experiments. So a theory is not a supposition. It is not a supposition or a proposition. It has been what? Tested. Okay. So we say it's a set of systematically related statements, including some law-like generalizations that have been tested empirically. Here, et al. Try to say that they are systematically related statements, including law-like generalizations that can be tested. No. They have been tested. If you are yet to test them, then you are dealing with what? Hypothesis. Hypotheses, which are come to that, they are just tentative statements, which are yet to be what? Verified by scientific experiments or test. Okay? So we say that a theory may involve a set of systematically related statements. And these statements can include statements that look like laws, that sometimes we call them principles. And they have been tested empirically. So I can't just stand here and say that and generate a theory. I can only generate some hypotheses, but not theory. Sometimes people use theory loosely. But when we talk about theory, it has been what? Tested and has some amount of empirical support. Okay? Now, then when we talk about law-like generalizations, we start looking at explanations that give conditions under which they can be tested, or conditions under which they hold true. Okay? And we're given an example in, say, competition theory. In competition theory, the theory says that firms that differentiate their products over time gain competitive advantage. That is a theory. Under competition theory, we say that firms that differentiate their products over time gain competitive advantage. So this is a theory. Now, out of this theory, there is a law-like generalization that comes out of this theory. And one of the law-like generalizations is that a firm that differentiates its product can charge higher prices. Okay? So that's a law-like generalization flowing from the theory of what? Competitive what? Advantage, which comes out of product differentiation. Okay? So that it says that if you are a firm, based on the theory, and you differentiate your products, then you can charge what? A higher price, so that you can gain value from it. So that can be an example of what we call law-like generalization. Law-like generalization. Now, I've provided some links that you can use to get some theories. But what is the role of theory in research. What's the role of theory in research? We say that theory provides the fuel for research. Theory provides the fuel for research. Now, if you want to really have a competent research done, there's no way you can escape theory. Because theory, remember we said that theory is based on what? Science that has gone through some repeated experiments and testing, and it has been proven to hold true. Okay? It has been proven to hold true. So when you base your research on theory, it means that you are standing on somewhat, some truth in code, because remember interpretivism. Truth in code, you are standing on some truth. So that truth gives you authority to be able to conduct your research. Otherwise, when you conduct your research and then there is no theory backing it, we say that your research is atheoretical. Is atheoretical. Means that there's no theory backing your research. So you are just on a wild goose chase. And I had just examined some very interesting, the guy can write one PhD thesis that I just examined. But for all 3 empirical papers that I read, there is no underlying theory. So I was asking myself, so what is this guy doing? What is the basis for all the 200 and something pages of write-up? Where is the theory? The theory is missing. And once the theory is missing, you are in trouble. Because you've not told me that the mission you are embarking on is to discover what? A new theory. So then I can say that, okay, you are doing what? Inductive research. So that one I can allow you. But if you are proposing to use a deductive approach, and yet after 240-something pages, I cannot point to one theory that is underlying the entire PhD thesis, then we have a problem. So how do we solve this problem? So sometimes we run into very difficult situations. For this, somebody who has paid fees from first year, the final year, he has written something, he's so happy about it. But when you pass it through the scientific method, there's a problem there. Okay? So for any research that you want to conduct, if it is not an inductive research, please make sure that you have a theory backing it. If even you have to go to psychology to borrow a theory to come and support it, go there and bring the theory. Because even as economists, we go to psychology, we go to sociology, and then borrow theories, and then make them our own. So if you've seen that you can borrow from a particular discipline, go there and borrow the theory from there, so that your work can have some leg to stand on. Because even we as researchers, we do this every day, but sometimes we also fall into those traps. Because sometimes you may just be in a hurry. You just want something to come out fast. Then you write, you are so excited. Maybe you have managed, and the journal has published it. But when you submit it for promotion, they will forget about the fact that it has been published. They will still subject it through what? Scientific evaluation, and say that, okay, even though you've published this paper here, but we cannot see any theory driving the work. So please don't go with theory. Theory is at the heart of research. The next slide, please. Apart from, so these are the links that I talked about. Just some theories that you can read based on your this, and just for, it can just be for curiosity. It can also be for learning, okay? And try to see whether you can generate law-like generalizations from them. Okay? There are a series of theories there. Now, apart from being fuel for research, theory can also point to what? Practice. Can point to practice. And for a firm, the theoretical propositions have implications for decisions, because out of these theories, laws are established. The law of demand and supply is used in management practice. The law of competition or competitive advantage. And for researchers, the theory narrows down things that have to be studied. So it gives you a clear direction what you have to test. From your theory, you can deduce testable hypotheses. Then you have your law-like generalizations, from which you can deduce what hypothesis and also test them. But we have seen that a lot of managers tend to take decisions based on intuition rather than theory, which is a bit problematic. Because our intuition may not be right. You only go by intuition when you don't have any theory available to help you make a decision. But where you have theory and you can generate theory or you can test theory, then it is better we do what? Take our decisions based on theory rather than on what? Intuition. Next one. And from theory, we can have what we call normative decision rules. Normative decision rule. And the normative decision basically tells you what to do when you are faced with what? The circumstances of the theory in practice. So if we talk about, for instance, we're talking about the law of demand and supply, saying that the higher the price, the what? The lower the quantity demanded. The higher the price. I'm now moving to supply side. Yeah. Now, so these are laws or theories. So when you are doing your business, how do you apply this law? That is what we call normative decision rule. It means that if I am in competition with somebody, if I want to sell more than the person, because we are selling what? Competing goods, then I have to what? Lower my prices, sell at a lower price. That's the normative decision from that theory. Okay? The theory gives you the rule, but that rule in itself has to be put to practice. And to put that into practice, you have to use what? The normative what? Decision rule. The normative decision rule. Then we have what we call behavioral learning theory, which basically tells us what the responses of people are when they are exposed to certain conditioning. When people are put placed in under certain conditions, the condition can be training, the condition can be just a work environment, the facilities that are provided under the work environment. What will be the impact of that conditioning on their work behavior? And that is what behavioral learning theory talks about. So for instance, if you may want to look at what will be the response of a worker to, say, an increase in this. If you double a worker's salary, what will happen? If your boss decides to double your salary, question is, will that increase your work output, or it will cause you to enjoy too much to the extent that it will even affect what? Productivity. So that was within behavioral learning theory. How do people respond to incentives? How do they respond to what? Motivation? Because you can think that you are motivating somebody, but they will not recognize. They will see that to be normal. It's something that they deserve. So you are not motivated. So in that case, it will not affect their work output. Okay. Then we have what we call descriptive theory. Descriptive theory. And it is just a theory that describes or explains what happens within the framework of a theory. Okay? So we can talk about the theory of, say, oligopoly. Okay? Oligopoly simply describes how firms interact when you have very few firms selling a particular commodity. So you can have, say, five or six firms controlling an industry. That will be explained by oligopoly. Then you can also have monopoly, okay, as a theory. It's a descriptive theory that will describe the behavior of a single firm. That is the only firm providing a particular service. So we call that just a descriptive theory. Descriptive theory. So I earlier on talked about the issue of intuition-based decision-making versus what? Science-based or theory-based decision-making. Especially in our part of the world, we tend to rely so much on intuition. And that's also because we are generally highly religious. So that intuition-based decision making, or just wild guesses around decisions, are not expected to generate optimal outcomes, because our intuition may be wrong. Okay? Can have the wrong intuition. And we're giving an example of an intuition-based where somebody says that anytime he wears a green shirt, for instance, and he plays cards, he will usually win. Okay? Now, there's no theory backing this. Okay? So it is just based on intuition. They have some particular days that they don't do something, or they don't go to some places. Not backed by any theory, but it's just based on intuition. Now, the issue is that most of the things that pertain to intuition are not testable scientifically. They are basically suppositions and sometimes superstition, which is beyond the realm of science, because scientists don't actually even believe in superstition. Okay? They see superstitions as hallucinations. Because if you want to push them into believing that there is superstition or spirituality, then they say that you are basically hallucinating. Yes, please. So the issue, yes, so you have a point there. The first part is correct, that intuition can drive theory. The problem is when you now just stay at the intuition level and take decisions based on intuition, but you don't put it through the scientific process. So the issue of you always wearing green and then it working has not gone through the scientific process. Because in order to let it go through the scientific process, it is not just you alone who has to wear green. So if you are wearing green and the other person is also wearing green, what will be the outcome? You understand that? So in this particular case, it is very difficult to test it, because you are now moving to the realm of luck, and science doesn't believe in those luck and all those things. You understand that? But I agree with you that intuition can drive the process of generating theory. All right. So the scientific method. Now, we mentioned that at the heart of everything is what? Theory. Theory is the fuel for research. That being the case, the scientific method involves these 6 elements. The first one is observation. Good science has to start with what? Observation. And the observation can come in several forms. Observation through all the senses, the human senses. Observation just from what you see in society, what you learn from society. Observation can come just you watching television, you watching a movie, watching a film. Observation can come from your readings and reflections. It can come through brainstorming, just having discussion with your colleagues. It can come through challenges, some challenge that you have faced, that you are trying to resolve. You can observe a lot from it and then embark on research. So your observation can lead to some discovery. So by discovery here, we are not yet talking about a theory that you have discovered, but just a research idea can be discovered from this stage, which can come out of some maybe research results that you have seen, some seminar you have attended, and somebody has presented some issues from which you have discovered something that you must test. So after the observation and discovering issues, you have to develop hypotheses. So the hypotheses, as I mentioned earlier, are tentative statements that can be tested empirically. So if you generate a statement which we cannot test empirically, then it is not hypothesis. It cannot be hypothesis. And that is why usually we take our time to screen hypothesis. If you say that you are stating a hypothesis, then you must make sure that this hypothesis can be tested. You can't just like this hypothesis that we talked about. You can hypothesize that anytime you wear green shirt, you win. Okay? So the question is, can we test that hypothesis? Yes, it's something that we can test. Okay? Related to you, because you said you, not somebody else. Okay? So we can let you play cards wearing green, say 20 times, and see the number of times you win out of these 20. Okay, then the hypothesis can then be confirmed or what? Rejected. So to confirm the hypothesis, first of all, to develop the hypothesis, you have to develop the hypothesis around literature, so that the hypothesis will not just be wild guesses. Because if you get to a point where you are stating hypothesis, you'll be asked, where are these hypotheses coming from? In other words, what are the literature roots of this hypothesis? Maybe in the literature you have seen some relationships here and there, but those relationships themselves are not hypotheses. But when you connect the dots, you can derive this hypothesis. So you have to clearly develop the hypothesis. Then you collect the data, do the analysis, and make conclusions. And out of this, new theories can come, or you are explaining existing theory. Okay? And the cycle can continue. Okay? So, giving an example, that for instance, you have a research question, which is generally the gender property. Is gender related to job outcomes? I would craft it better as how is gender related to job outcomes? How is gender related to what? Job outcomes. So that's the research question. You can turn it into a hypothesis where you are looking at, for instance, you can say that, okay, female workers have better job satisfaction than their male counterparts. That's a hypothesis. But he is looking at it, for instance, in the service sector. Female employees in the services sector have higher job satisfaction than their what? Their male what? Counterparts. So this is a hypothesis that you can test. Now, to test this hypothesis, it will mean that you have to what? Collect what? Data. We may have to see whether we can change this thing. So, in which case, you can perform the hypothesis test. Move to the next one. You can perform the hypothesis test. So, given a research question, you should be able to state corresponding what? Hypothesis. Such that these hypotheses can be what? Tested. So, for instance, if you have a research question like, are company share prices affected by unexpected capital investment announcements? Are the share prices affected by unexpected announcements in investments? So here you are testing news, the effect of news on share prices. So news. And if you learn the efficient market hypothesis, it says that share prices reflect what? All available what? Information. So if I'm undertaking this research, I'll base my research on the theory of what we call efficient market hypothesis, which says that share prices reflect all available what? Information. And by available information, it includes news. So if that is the case, then an announcement of new investment should not what? Affect share prices. So I can test my hypothesis and say share price performance is positively and instantaneously. So this one is a compound hypothesis impacted by unexpected capital investment announcement. In other words, the news, which is not affected about new capital investment, is going to affect what? Share prices. And here we are talking about positive effect. So it's going to increase share prices instantaneously. In other words, immediately the news is announced that there will be unexpected investment. Remember, here, take note, the investment has not yet happened. It's the news. So a company has announced that this year we are going to invest $1 million into ABCD. And the company shares are listed on the stock market. So this researcher is trying to find out whether this unexpected announcement about new investment will cause the share price of the company to immediately increase. So you are not talking about increases several months after the announcement. So this research is very clear. Now we see that happening so much within the industry. And let me use my club for example. When they beat Manchester United, don't mock me, but I'm a Manchester United supporter. When news about the sale of our club was announced, the share prices immediately jumped because investors were now upbeat that the new investors that are coming to take over the club are going to change the direction of the club. They will not be that stingy like the Glaziers. So immediately, the share prices increase. So somebody can conduct research to see whether the increase was just due to chance or it was due to the announcement. And that is a similar work that this gentleman is conducting. Now, there is a relationship between the elements. So move to the next one. Theory connects with its various elements. The research objectives relate directly to the research questions, which also relate directly to what? Your research what? Hypothesis, which also relate directly to what? The theory. So first you have your research questions, which are related to your objectives, from which you derive your what? Hypothesis. And when the hypotheses are tested, they are evaluated against the theory. Okay? They are evaluated against the theory and a decision is made. So that you cannot separate any of these elements from the other. They are intrinsically related. So that at the end of the day, we must be able to see a clear flow. Now, let's look at one of the key characteristics of science. We say that scientific research has to be what? Rigorous. It must have rigor. And being rigorous means that it is based on systematically collected data. Which data is used to test hypothesized relationships about one or two or more variables. Now, after the data is collected, we then have to go through the process of analyzing the data to examine the consistency of the predictions from our data with that of what? The theory. So that's what we mean by rigor when it comes to scientific research or science. Now, if you then see that the data and the predictions are consistent, then we say that the hypothesis is what? Supported, or the theory is supported. If the data and the predictions thereof are inconsistent, then we say that the hypothesis is what? Not supported. So at the end of the day, when you have gone through a rigorous scientific research process, you should be able to indicate that my data supported my what? Hypothesized predictions. And for that matter, my hypothesis is upheld or my hypothesis is not supported. Stricto sensu, we do not usually want to say that you have accepted a hypothesis. So you have hypothesis. When you have hypothesis in science, the hypothesis is usually divided. One is what? The null hypothesis. The null hypothesis. And the null hypothesis will usually hold the position of no effect or no relationship or no impact. Okay, that's the null hypothesis. So I can say that gender is not related to wages. So that's my null hypothesis. And my alternative hypothesis, H1, will just be gender is related to wages. The hypothesis is that I am trying to test the relationship between gender and what? Wages. But if I am stating the hypothesis scientifically, I have to state the null hypothesis and the what? The alternate or the alternative hypothesis. The null hypothesis will usually be stated in a no effect sense or no relationship sense. So I can say gender is not related to what? Wages. Gender not related to wages. Or gender does not significantly affect what? Wages. That's another way to say it. Gender does not differ with wage. I mean, gender does not determine wages. Okay? So if I want to turn this into an alternative hypothesis, the alternative of the gender is related to what? Wages. Now, if I then subject this, I collect data on wages of men and women, and then I do my analysis. And then I find that this null hypothesis is not true. The conclusion I need to draw is that the null hypothesis that gender is not related to wages is rejected. Is rejected. Which means there is a relationship between gender and what? Wages. But I do not say that the null hypothesis, since the null hypothesis is rejected, I am accepting what? The alternative hypothesis. Why? Because we are taking a cue from the legal jurisprudence. When you go to court, a judge usually makes a conviction of what? Guilty or what? Not guilty. Guilty means that based on the evidence available to the judge, the circumstances point to the person having what? Committed the crime. Not guilty means that based on the evidence available, the judge has no reason to believe that the person was committed the crime. But it doesn't mean that the person is innocent. It doesn't mean that it's just that the judge doesn't have enough evidence before him or her. Because if the prosecution is not able to provide the judge with all the available evidence, meanwhile, indeed, the person is guilty in truth, that is before God and man. The person is indeed guilty, but the judge finds that the person is not what? Guilty. Here, it means that the person is not guilty, but the person is not what? Innocent. Because before God and man, the person actually what? Committed a crime. So in strict sense, we say that do not reject the null hypothesis. Or if the null hypothesis is confirmed, you say that we fail to reject the null hypothesis, which means that this is what happens. Okay? We fail to reject, we are unable to confirm or establish the null hypothesis. What then is good science? And good science here talks about the characteristics of the scientific method. The characteristics of the scientific method. Number one, a good science is empirical. Empirical. Which means if it is a science, then it has to be able to pass the test of we collecting the data in real life and confirming that theory or that science with what? The reality. So the data collection is collected from reality. Okay? So a good science is empirical. In other words, it is something that can lend itself to what? Empirical investigation. Then it is replicable. You can replicate it. Replication means that if the same method that you use to generate your theory is used by me, I should arrive at the same conclusion as you did. It doesn't matter how many of us have conducted the research. We should all, following the same methodology, arrive at what? The same conclusion. That's the issue of replication. If your research cannot be replicated, then we can just say that you have just doctored the findings. Or the research is highly subjective. You did not follow through the scientific process. So replication or replicability is one of the characteristics of science, or good science. Then it should be analytical. Analytical. Now, science has to be based on the fact that we have gone through systematic data collection. We've coded the data. We've cleaned the data. And then we have competently analyzed the data. In that case, we say that it is analytical. It is not just based on opinions or views, but there is a laid down procedure that you have to undertake in order to arrive at it. And the other characteristic is that it is theory driven. Science, good science is theory driven. For your research to qualify as a good science, it has to rely on existing theory, especially if you are using a deductive approach. But if you are using an inductive approach, which usually will be the method adopted by those within the qualitative realm, it will not necessarily be theory driven, but it will rather drive what theory. And that's where the debate is as to what constitutes valid knowledge. Because you see that this that I have presented is an illustration of what we call the characteristic of what the scientific method. But being largely driven by positivists, they say that one key attribute of what science is that it is what theory driven. So, which means that the original intent of scientific research is what? Deductive research. Okay.
As you are going to new, finding a new solution for the problem. So, with this one, you do not be all because there's no existing knowledge that you rely on or compare.
And there's no related theory. You see where the problem is. At least there will be some theory related to the word. That's the argument. I'm not saying they are right. Remember that we are back to that debate as to what constitutes valid knowledge. That's epistemology. Those who believe so much in the scientific process think that it has to be theory driven. Another who is an interpretivist will say no. It should rather be that it is the research that is driving what? Theory. A good science drives what? Theory. Okay? So here I will not be too rigid on it. And that's why I've called your attention to it. That there will still be some controversy around it. Then it should be logical. Good science has to be what? Logical. It must follow some reasoned analysis. Some reasoned analysis. And this reasoned analysis should lead us into what? Some logical conclusions. So A must follow B, must follow C, must follow D. So there has to be some logic. It should not be something like you are doing some lotto. There's really no pattern. Okay, so it has to be logical. And lastly, what you have dealt with is the fact that it has to be what? Rigorous. Then recently there has been a discussion on evidence-based management, which we talked about in our first lecture. That the trend is that management decision making has to be based on what? Evidence. Evidence. But that leads us to the issue of what we call parsimony or model parsimony. The issue is that because much of research is conducted at universities, there's the tendency to have the lab for complex systems and complex setups and complex models. But model parsimony advocates that if a problem can be solved using a simple approach, it is better to follow that rather than solving the same problem using what? A complex approach. If my aim is to get to Malcolm, there are several roads from here that can lead me to Malcolm. Can pass here and then go through Tipoli. Then barcode thereabout. Then I go through the Lamashavu, the stadium area. Then I go through back to the mosque, Central Mosque. And then I get back to what? Malcolm. I can also pass through this way, go to what? Greek. Or I can even go this way, go to Nobisco. And then I turn back. Okay? In the end, I'll get to Malcolm, so long as I know that. But the advocacy here is that if I can just use this road and go straight to Malcolm, that's the best decision to take. And if I'm a rational human being, that should be the best decision to take, because it will save me what? Fuel and what? And time. So that is the issue of parsimony. If in the same model, if I use 3 variables, I can achieve my objective. Why should I use 10 variables? For people to, say that I know so much. No. So we are advocating that use the simplest solution, because it will be much appreciated than what? A complex one. So we close with research proposal. Okay? For every research, especially research that is commissioned, or you are responding to a call, or you are writing a dissertation, you must write what? A proposal. A proposal. It is not different from when a man sees a woman that he likes. You have to present a proposal, which can be very tricky. Okay? It's a similar situation. Research what? Proposal. So the proposal, if I'm just going to write my research to publish, I don't need a proposal. I just start with my topic. I write, usually after the topic, I can just do a brief sketch of the abstract. A lot of people will tell you, you write the abstract after you are done. But I'll sketch in my mind what I expect. So I just sketch the abstract. And then I go to my background. Then I go to my literature, my method, and then resource discussion, then conclusion and implications, that's all. But if I'm responding to a call for proposal, then I have to write a research proposal. Or if you are going to write a dissertation or a thesis, you must write a research proposal. And the research proposal identifies and defines the problem that you want to investigate. The problem you want to investigate. Okay? So it must have a clear direction. It must give a clear direction as to where this research wants to go. Without a clear direction, the research proposal will be rejected. It will also clearly state the approach that you intend to take, not in so much detail. So it also depends on the page limitations. Some of the funders will tell you that not exceeding 5 pages. Some will say 10 pages. Some will say 15 pages. So the page limitation will tell you how detailed you should go. Then you must specify the deliverables. What will come out of the research? Okay. Are you going to come out with a policy brief? Are you going to come out with a published paper? Are you going to come out with a product? And it must have a budget and a timeline that will tell how long you want to undertake the research. So move to the next, which is the last part, where we are looking at the outline of a research proposal. What are the components of a research proposal? A standard research proposal will have a title, or some will say topic. Then it will give a background information illustrating the events leading up to the request for proposal. Now, after the research background, you can have your problem. In some cases, the problem and the background are fused together. So this is not a straitjacket kind of. So that's why I say standard. In some cases, the problem and then the background are fused together. Then you have what we call research strategy and methods. That's your methodology. And then expected outcomes. If you take here at they will say the nature of the final report. It is still flexible because for most of the research proposals that I have written, I have not indicated the nature of the final report. Because that can always come later. Then you have your budget. You must be able to tell us how much it will cost to conduct the research. Because research can be very expensive. And that's why most people confine themselves to using secondary data. Because if you have to go to the field to collect the data, then you must as well have the money. If you don't have the money, then you have to look for sponsorship. Then you must have a timeline or time schedule to indicate what each of these activities. When will you write the background? When will you collect the data? When will you do analysis? When will you write up the report, etc., etc. Then you would usually end by indicating the qualifications of the project consultants or the researcher so that they will know the capacity. So some will call a statement of capacity. They must know who is conducting the research. Because if what you have stated in the proposal and your capacity do not match, you will not receive the money. Okay? Because your profile and then and what you have stated here, they are not matched. So it will be rejected. If you read Exhibit 2.8 in Her et al., pages 50, 51, 52, 53, there's a sample proposal there. You can read it to learn how to write a research proposal. So you can go through these questions to test yourself whether you were here. And if you were here, whether you were listening, and then this to exercise your brains Okay, any question before we call it a day? Any question? All right, thank you very much for coming. See you next week.
This information goes to the I would particularly see that they will enjoy this and use this call. If you are done with this or you need any
So what can, is it something we can? It's the same.
one check, one check. Attendance, you know you are not silent. Your food. Just don't come in because we want to tell you the problem.
Okay, okay. So that if we have to get change that in then we change it. That's the distribution. All right, thank you. Hello, how are you? All right, so in discussing business, research, we should be able to grasp that we have applied research and then basic research. Applied research and basic research. Relating it to our context as business students, we have applied business research and then basic business research. When we talk about applied business research, we should know that the emphasis of applied basic research is to solve a problem that is specific to a particular organization or institution. So the research is problem-solving oriented. It is not just taken out of curiosity. As academics, we take research largely out of curiosity. You want to know something, you want to learn something new out of the world. This is contrasted with basic research, which is research that does not have practice as the practical focus or the main focus, but it is just born by the desire to contribute to knowledge and to understand a particular phenomenon as it applies to a broader group. So in the end, the research is not drilled down to the needs of a specific organization or institution or industry per se, but it is a broad array that would basically seek to identify patterns, identify relationships without necessarily being problem-oriented such that it can solve problems. So, and that brings us to just this slide, which tries to compare basic research to applied research. So, in the first instance, in terms of the purpose, basic research basically tries to expand knowledge of processes. So you want to learn about, for instance, what are the factors that influence motivation in the service industry. Factors that influence motivation in the service industry. So the purpose here is just to find out the factors that are determining how individuals working in the service industry get motivated. But these factors may differ from one service organization to the other. If you want to drill down, analyze the factors that determine motivation for a particular company, then you are now doing applied business research, because you are now drilling down to a specific company where you identify factors which will now inform policy within that organization. Okay. Then, basic research usually will produce results that have wider implications. They have wider implications, not specific implications. I can conduct a research in the banking sector, which involves all banks, and then I now pinpoint a particular bank and say that apply the recommendations from my state. Because the findings I've come about with will be general in nature. So if I want to drill down to the implication for a particular bank, then I now have to apply the research and then interview or use documentation relating to that particular bank. Do the analysis within that context. Then I can now give recommendations specific to that particular organization. So if we talk about basic and applied research, and we are looking at it from the point of view of context, the context for basic research is usually driven by universities, knowledge institutions. So in my line of research, hardly do I pick a particular organization and start analyzing it. I don't have that motivation. Okay? So I will pick data relating to different organizations, different people, different countries, and then establish patterns, establish causalities, and then come out with my recommendations, which of course will also be general. This will be contrasted with applied research, where the context can be universities working with industry, or industry themselves undertaking research to solve problems that are peculiar to their organizations or institutions. So as you look at the two more and more, you will get to know that applied research will more or less involve practitioners, or practitioners inviting academics to investigate into issues that concern those organizations. But with basic research, the interest is not driven by practice. The interest is driven by the quest to generate knowledge, sometimes just even to generate theories. So that being the case, you would often find that it is universities which will be involved in that endeavor. Now, I'm giving some examples that can help us to understand the practicalities involved in applied versus basic research. So if a research question is carved in this nature, Coca-Cola asks, why is Pepsi gaining market share in Paris? Why is it that Pepsi, which is a substitute product, because it's a substitute product, is gaining market share in Paris? So in this particular research, the purpose of Coca-Cola is to identify the factors that drive the increasing market share of what? Pepsi, so that it can learn from it. Okay, so it has a direct practical implication. If we want to reflect that particular research question, but looking at it from a basic point of view, we would then just generally be interested in what factors make one product, which is a substitute to the other, more successful or competitive than the other. So as an academic, that's what I will be interested in. I will not be interested in Pepsi and Coca-Cola. So this thing will be, I set up my research, but I want to know factors that determine competitive edge. Competitive edge. But it is the same thing that is done in applied research, where Coca-Cola wants to investigate to find out why people probably like Pepsi in Paris increasingly than they do for Coca-Cola. Now, a basic research question which we can look at here is to say that why are people drinking more bottled water and less cola? Why? Why? In this case, you are not targeting implication for a particular institution or organization. It is just a question to know why we have those preferences. Okay. Then a second example is for applied researchers. Can prospective employees' psychological profiles reduce turnover at McDonald's? So in this particular case, the purpose is that they've seen that at McDonald's, there's a high turnover rate. In other words, people are resigning. People are leaving and joining other companies. So they want to know that, if we study the psychological profiles of those that turn over, can that give us an idea as to how we can influence the psychology of our workers so that they can stay? Okay? So it is addressed and targeted at solving a specific problem. Now, that same problem can be made a basic research problem by raising the question such as what psychological factors predict reduced turnover in service occupations. So in this particular case, you will not just be interested in McDonald's. Okay? Your focus is the service industry in general. And even that, you can just focus on, say, hotels and restaurants. you can focus on banking services, telecommunication services, and not targeting, say, MTN or Vodafone or whatever. So in the end, they are both looking at psychological factors. But this one drills down to a specific what? Organization or institution. So later on, you can look at more examples which are outlined here. So you should be, if there's a jumble of research questions, you should be able to separate them into applied and what? And basic, given the principles that we have laid. In our next lecture, we'll look at the research process proper, but just to give you a foretaste of the stages involved in the research process. The first stage in a standard research process, so this is a general process, is to first of all get the topic, get the research topic, and ensuring that the topic is researchable, okay? So you can come out with a research topic, and the research topic is not researchable. Generally speaking, we say that if you generate a research topic and the answer can be a yes or no, then it's not researchable. That's one of the ways to identify. If it can just be answered by a yes or a no, then there's no need for research. So, which means that a research topic must have some depth. And how do you get the research topic? The research question. There are several ways that you can get a research. And the easiest and the commonest is through literature review. Literature review. Because especially within the academic context, if I want to generate a research topic, I go through the literature first. So if somebody comes to me and says that I want to do master, I want to do PhD, I tell you that which area are you interested in? When you have mentioned that, then I will tell you, okay, what gaps have you identified in that area that you want to contribute to? If you can't answer that, it means that you have not read. You have not read. Okay? So I'll tell you, I'll give you some time, go and read around the area. When you have identified a problem, then you come and we what? We discuss it. Okay? So one of the easiest ways is to review literature. When you review literature on the subject, you identify what is known and then what you think is not known, or what is known, but you think that you can challenge it. Okay? So that can constitute a source of generating knowledge or the topic. You can identify topics through conferences, seminars. When you go to a conference, a research conference, a seminar, they are presenting. New ideas are generated from there. And then you can identify a topic from there. And once you identify the topic, then you go and review the literature to clarify it and to make sure that it is well cemented. You can also get the research topic from calls for papers. Sometimes you see that call for papers, and then they tell you what areas that the papers should cover, the areas that the papers should cover. They give indications. Sometimes calls for proposals. When you see calls for proposals, there can be research gaps and research topics that you can glean from there. So these are just a few areas. Now, literature review is a very important process within the research arena.